Listen carefully because what I'm about to tell you will either wake you up or expose you. Life doesn't reward the man who chases. Life rewards the man who waits, who watches, who moves only when the world bends in his direction. Most people don't fail because they're weak. They fail because they cling, they beg, they overextend, they leak energy the way fools leak secrets, and nothing repels power faster than desperation. Machiavelli understood this centuries ago. A man who needs nothing becomes a man. Everything moves toward. When you stop chasing, you stop bleeding. You stop negotiating with your own worth. You stop handing the world the privilege of deciding your value. And suddenly people sense it. They feel the shift. They feel your silence before you speak. They feel your presence before you enter. Because power isn't loud. Power is controlled. Power is cold. Power is the man who knows he can walk away from anything and anyone without losing himself. If you're ready to step into that version of yourself, comment this phrase right now. I do not chase, I align. Say it, own it, engrave it into who you're becoming. Number 1, the withdrawal of the unnecessary. When you finally stop chasing, something ruthless and liberating happens inside you. The world that once felt loud, demanding, chaotic goes silent. And in that silence, you begin to see who actually deserved your energy and who only survived on your pursuit. The powerful truth is this. Most people weren't drawn to you. They were drawn to your effort, to your availability, to the way you reached outward instead of inward. Machiavelli warned that a ruler loses authority the moment he appears too eager, too hungry for approval, too willing to prove himself. The same applies to you. When you withdraw your unnecessary attention, the balance of power shifts instantly. You stop feeding the illusions that drained you. You stop rewarding the people who contributed nothing. You stop letting everyone access the kingdom of your presence like it's an open market. And here's the part they never tell you. The moment you stop trying to be chosen, you become the one who chooses. That's when alignment begins. Because alignment requires space, and space comes from letting go. If you understand this shift, comment, I do not chase, I choose. Say it so your mind remembers what your past self forgot. Number 2, the psychology of pulling, not pursuing. When a man learns the psychology of pulling instead of pursuing, he steps into a hierarchy of power that most people will never touch, because the average person lives in emotional debt, constantly paying others with approval, validation, and attention just to feel noticed. But power doesn't bloom in a man who spends his life reaching outward. It blooms in the man who becomes a gravitational force. Dark psychology makes one truth painfully clear. Humans are drawn to what they cannot fully read, control, or access. The moment you stop chasing, you stop broadcasting your intentions, and suddenly you become unpredictable. Dangerously unpredictable. People fear what they can't define, yet they are magnetized by it. Just the same, Machiavellian philosophy teaches that influence isn't gained by shouting your worth, but by withholding it, by creating the right amount of distance, by becoming the man whose presence is earned, not given away like free samples. When you stop pursuing others, you create a psychological vacuum that pulls them toward you. They start wondering what changed, what you discovered, what power grew inside you while they weren't paying attention. And here's the cold truth. They're not drawn to your new silence. They're drawn to the certainty you finally carry. You become the storm they can sense but never predict. You become the exception in a world full of men who beg for scraps of attention. This shift isn't arrogance. It's alignment. It's the moment you stop negotiating your identity. It's when you realize that what is meant for you does not require a chase. It requires a presence so solid that the world adjusts itself around you. This is the beginning of becoming untouchable, letting the world come to you, not because you demanded, but because you've made your value impossible to ignore. If this resonates with you, comment the phrase, "Power comes to me." Say it to anchor the mindset of a man who no longer moves from fear but from inevitability. Number 3, the art of strategic absence and calculated presence. There comes a moment in every powerful man's evolution when he realizes that silence is not just the absence of noise. It is a weapon, and absence is not withdrawal. It is strategy. When you stop chasing, you're not disappearing. You're repositioning. You're stepping into the shadows where real power gathers, grows, and sharpens. Machiavelli understood that a ruler never reveals his every move because the unseen threat is always more intimidating than the visible one. The same principle applies to your life. When people cannot predict you, they cannot control you. When they cannot read you, they cannot use you. When they cannot access you at will, they are forced to value every moment they do get with you. This is the psychology of strategic absence. Pulling away not out of weakness, but out of discipline, refinement, and self-respect. And the moment you reappear, you appear stronger, colder, more composed, and far less available to the chaos you once entertained. People notice when your energy recalibrates. They feel when they no longer own space in your mind. They sense the boundaries tightening, the doors locking, the fortress rising. You are no longer the man who chases outcomes. You are the man who architects them. And this shift terrifies those who benefited from your old patterns. Because your absence exposes their dependence while revealing your independence. Your presence becomes a privilege, not a routine. Your time becomes an asset, not an offering. Your attention becomes rare, and therefore valuable. And as dark psychology teaches, scarcity creates desire, every single time. When you master this, you realize the truth. You don't need to chase what is meant for you, not when your name begins to carry weight. Not when your aura speaks louder than your words. Not when your silence demands more respect than your old explanations ever did. This is the Machiavellian edge. Controlled distance, deliberate timing, and the confidence to let people feel your absence long enough to understand your worth. If you can feel this transformation building within you, comment this phrase. My silence is power. Repeat it, claim it, and watch how the world starts adjusting to the new man you're becoming. Number 4. The sovereignty of a man who no longer seeks permission. When you stop chasing, you reclaim a throne you didn't even realize you had surrendered. The throne of your own sovereignty. The internal kingdom where self-respect, discipline, and silent power dictate every decision you make. Most men spend their lives unconsciously begging for permission. Permission to be valued. Permission to exist in someone's world. Permission to take up space. Permission to rise. They hand over their crown in exchange for a scrap of validation, and then wonder why no one treats them like a king. But the moment you stop chasing, everything reverses. You stop seeking permission because you finally understand an uncomfortable truth. No one gives power to a man who acts like he needs it. Power is attracted to certainty, and certainty is born from a man who trusts his own judgment more than he trusts the shifting approval of others. Machiavelli wrote that it is better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both. But what most people misunderstand is the deeper meaning. Fear is not terror. It is respect. It is the recognition that you are not a man who can be swayed, manipulated, or tamed. When you no longer chase, people begin to respect your boundaries, not because you demanded it, but because your behavior demonstrates a truth they cannot ignore. You do not break your own rules. You do not abandon your standards for temporary feelings. You do not dilute your identity to fit someone else's expectations. Every time you stop chasing, you reinforce a message in the minds of others. I answer to myself. And that message carries weight. Dark psychology reveals that humans instinctively follow those who appear self-directed, internally anchored, and emotionally unmoved by external chaos. People trust a man who trusts himself. They align with a man who doesn't scramble for approval. They approach a man who stands still because he's not afraid of what happens if others walk away. And most importantly, they respect the man who can look at loss without collapsing. Because here's the real Machiavellian twist. When you stop chasing, you stop fearing the consequences of being alone. You learn that solitude sharpens you. It doesn't break you. You learn that your value doesn't shrink when someone leaves. It expands because now your energy is no longer being wasted. You learn that the world bends for the man who bends for no one. And once you internalize this, you stop negotiating with your own potential. You start moving like a man who knows he is the prize, not because he says it, but because he lives it. If you're ready to rule your inner kingdom without apology, comment this phrase. I answer only to my purpose. Let it carve itself into your mindset as you rise into the man you were always meant to become. Number 5, a cold ascension. becoming the man the world must respond to. There is a silent moment in every man's rise where something shifts permanently inside him, where he stops moving like a seeker and starts moving like a force, where he stops trying to fit into the world and instead bends the world around his will. This moment is the birth of the cold ascension, the transformation from a man who chases outcomes to a man who architects with ruthless precision. When you stop chasing, you begin to operate on a frequency that only the self-governed can understand. You become deliberate, measured, unshakable. You stop pouring your energy into people who never earned it and redirect that power into building the version of yourself that no longer needs external validation to feel whole. Machiavelli wrote that men must either be won over or destroyed, and whether people realize it or not, your new detachment does exactly that. To some, your absence is a relief. To others, it is a psychological earthquake that exposes their dependence on your old patterns. But to you, it is liberation. You are no longer trying to be liked. You are trying to be aligned, no longer trying to be chosen. You are choosing yourself, and that shift creates a ripple that others cannot ignore. Dark psychology shows that humans subconsciously respect the man who moves without hesitation. They respect the man who doesn't explain himself, who doesn't justify why he's leveling up, who doesn't ask for opinions before making decisions that elevate his life. This kind of man is dangerous because he is unpredictable, and unpredictability is the birthplace of power. When people don't know what you'll do next, they stop taking you for granted. They stop assuming you'll always be available. They stop expecting you to prioritize their comfort over your destiny. And slowly, their behavior changes, not because you demanded it, but because your transformation forces them to recalibrate. You've evolved from a man who chased certainty to a man who creates it, from a man who sought validation to a man whose presence speaks louder than any approval could. You begin to notice that the opportunities you used to chase now start chasing you. The people who once ignored you now watch you. The ones who underestimated you now speak your name with caution. The world responds differently to a man who no longer fears loss because that man is no longer controlled by anything outside himself. And here is the secret most will never learn. When you become the source of your own worth, you become untouchable. You become the storm that doesn't break, the fire that doesn't dim, the force that doesn't fold. And anyone who approaches you now must come with respect, intention, and alignment, or they won't be allowed near your world at all. If this speaks to the man you are becoming, comment this phrase, "I rise without permission." Let it echo in your mind as you continue ascending into the version of yourself that nothing and no one can shake. Number 6, the power of indifference, commanding reality by refusing to need it. There is a rare moment in a man's evolution when he truly understands the potency of indifference, when he realizes that the world bends not to the strongest or the loudest, but to the one who doesn't need anything from it, the one who moves like a self-contained universe whose value exists with or without recognition. This is the moment your power becomes undeniable because indifference is not apathy. It is controlled emotional discipline, the art of wanting nothing while attracting everything. When you stop chasing approval, affection, opportunities, people, you cut the psychological strings that once allowed the world to pull you in every direction. Suddenly you operate from a place of unbreakable internal authority. Machiavelli understood this more deeply than most philosophers of power. He taught that a ruler must never reveal desperation because desperation makes you predictable, malleable, manipulable. But when you carry yourself with calm indifference, you become something entirely different. A man who cannot be bribed by praise, controlled by desire, or broken by rejection. And here's the dark psychological twist that most men never grasp. The moment you no longer need someone, they become more interested in needing you. Humans are wired to chase emotional scarcity. They are drawn to the unfazed, the unmoved, the unreadable. Your indifference becomes a mirror reflecting their insecurities, and that reflection pulls them in like gravity. This is why the man who doesn't beg for attention receives it, and the man who stops trying to prove his worth becomes the one everyone silently measures themselves against. But understand this clearly. Indifference is not an act. It is a transformation. It is earned through solitude, through confronting your own weaknesses, through walking away from situations where the old version of you would have stayed because he feared being alone more than he feared being disrespected. When you master indifference, you stop reacting and start selecting. You stop pleading and start observing. You stop hoping for alignment and start requiring it. You no longer chase potential. You evaluate patterns. You no longer cling to attachments. You measure their cost. And every time you choose yourself over temporary comfort, your inner world shifts into something sharper, colder, more sovereign. People begin to notice the difference. They notice your silence isn't passive, it's calculating. They notice your calm isn't weakness, it's command. They notice your distance isn't confusion, it's control. Machiavellian philosophy thrives in this terrain because a man who needs nothing can negotiate from a position of absolute leverage. When you're not desperate for a specific outcome, you can watch others reveal themselves. You can study their intentions. You can choose the terms of engagement. And the most powerful part, most people expose their weaknesses when they realize they no longer have power over you. They over-explain, they over-apologize, they overreact. They scramble to regain the attention they once took for granted. And you, steady, quiet, unmoved, see the truth for what it is. Dark psychology teaches that emotional control is the highest form of dominance because the one who controls his emotions controls the entire dynamic. When you detach, you gain the ability to think with clarity instead of impulse. You make decisions based on logic instead of longing. You walk away from situations that drain you, not because you're angry, but because they are no longer aligned with the man you are becoming. This is what makes you untouchable. Not coldness for the sake of ego, but the refusal to let external forces dictate your internal state. You become the man who is calm in every room, certain in every interaction, selective with every connection. You become the man who listens more than he speaks, who observes more than he reacts, who chooses more than he chases. And slowly, the world begins to adjust. People approach you with more respect because your indifference has restructured the balance. Opportunities start flowing toward you because you no longer sabotage yourself with desperation. Your self-worth strengthens because it is rooted in something unshakable, your own standards. Your life begins aligning in ways you once thought required endless effort, not because you forced it, but because you finally stopped getting in your own way. This is the essence of the Machiavellian man. He does not chase power. He becomes the kind of man for whom power is a natural consequence. He does not compete for attention. His presence is the attention. He does not seek validation. His certainty validates itself. You become a man who is harder to influence, harder to manipulate, harder to distract, harder to break, and that alone elevates you above the majority of men still living on emotional autopilot. If this part of your evolution resonates with the man you know you're becoming, comment this phrase to anchor it in your mind. I need nothing. I command everything. Let it echo in your identity as you continue shaping yourself into the force the world can feel long before you speak. Number 7, the shadow crown. Mastering power through emotional immunity. There comes a phase in a man's ascent where he steps fully into the shadow. Crown. The invisible authority earned not through titles, noise, or ego, but through the discipline of emotional immunity. The refusal to be swayed by chaos, pulled by the opinions of the weak, or poisoned by the expectations of those who never carried his burdens. This is the point where you transition from simply holding boundaries to becoming the boundary, where you stop defending your worth and instead embody it so completely that no external force can diminish it. Emotional immunity is not numbness. It is sovereignty over your inner world. It is the realization that your emotions are meant to be mastered, not outsourced. Machiavelli understood that a ruler loses control the second others can predict his reactions, manipulate his fears, or trigger his impulses. A man who cannot regulate himself becomes a puppet in the hands of those who know his weaknesses. But a man who has trained himself to remain calm, strategic, and unreadable becomes untouchable. When you develop emotional immunity, you stop being pulled by people's intentions. You start seeing them for what they are without the fog of attachment, fear, or insecurity blurring your vision. Their flattery doesn't inflate you. Their disrespect doesn't break you. Their approval doesn't validate you. Their absence doesn't wound you. You move through life with a cold clarity that others both envy and fear because you are no longer controlled by what controls them. Most men crumble because they seek emotional comfort more than emotional strength. They run toward whatever soothes them instead of mastering what shapes them. But when you stop chasing comfort, you begin building character. When you stop chasing validation, you begin building value. When you stop chasing outcomes, you begin building inevitability. Emotional immunity creates a psychological field around you, an aura of stability and leadership that others cannot ignore. People sense that you won't react impulsively, that you won't break under pressure, that you won't start wars over temporary feelings. They recognize your restraint as power, your silence as strategy, your distance as discipline. You become the man who can see 10 steps ahead while others are still struggling with the first one. This is where dark psychology comes in. Humans instinctively follow the emotionally stable because stability feels like safety. They trust what they cannot shake. They are drawn to what they cannot destabilize. And that means your emotional mastery becomes a magnet. People begin to orbit you not because you chase them, but because you represent something they lack, certainty. But understand this clearly, emotional immunity does not mean isolation. It means selection. You do not lock your heart. You lock your standards. You do not avoid connection. You avoid chaos. You do not reject vulnerability. You reject manipulation. You become willing to walk away from anyone who treats your presence like an afterthought. Unwilling to compromise your integrity for temporary affection. Unwilling to shrink yourself just to fit someone else's limited perception. This is where your shadow crown solidifies, when you rule yourself so completely that no one else can rule you. And here's the paradox that Machiavelli would appreciate. The more immune you become to emotional chaos, the more influence you gain over your world. You speak less and people listen more. You give less and people offer more. You reveal less and people invest more. You detach more and people pursue more. Emotional immunity doesn't make you heartless. It makes your heart disciplined. It redirects your compassion toward those who earn it, your loyalty toward those who respect it, and your energy toward goals that elevate you rather than drain you. It teaches you that your emotions are your soldiers meant to obey you, not overthrow you. And once you master that, you no longer ask life for alignment. You enforce it. You no longer hope for stability. You create it. You no longer fear loss. You understand that anything leaving your life is either a lesson or a liberation. This level of mastery is rare, which is why it commands respect without ever demanding it. It makes you the man who stands firm when others crumble, who sees clearly when others are clouded, who walks forward while others stay trapped in cycles they can't escape. And the beautiful, ruthless truth is that once you wear the shadow crown, life no longer intimidates you because you no longer seek permission to exist within it. If this resonates with the power rising inside you, comment this phrase, "My mind is my throne." Let it carve itself into your identity as you continue becoming the kind of man only a few ever evolve into but everyone feels. Number 8, the calculated heart. Ruling desire instead of being ruled by it. There is a stage in a man's evolution where he realizes that desire unchecked, unexamined, unmastered is the chain that keeps most men enslaved to people, emotions, impulses, and illusions that dilute their power. This is the moment he understands that becoming untouchable requires more than discipline over his actions or control over his emotions. It requires sovereignty over his desire itself. Most men chase because they have not mastered desire. They want connection, attention, validation, affection, opportunity, and in wanting it, they expose themselves. Wanting is not the problem. The problem is allowing wanting to govern your behavior. Machiavelli understood that a ruler who cannot restrain his desires becomes predictable and vulnerable, easy to manipulate, easy to pull off his throne. A man who desires too openly becomes a man who can be steered. But a man who holds his desires in a clenched fist, revealing nothing, moving only when it benefits him, this man becomes strategically dangerous. Dark psychology teaches that human desire is shaped by scarcity and uncertainty. What is easily accessed becomes easily undervalued. What is constantly available becomes taken for granted. And what reveals itself too quickly becomes dismissed before it is understood. When you stop chasing, you are not killing desire. You are mastering it. You are choosing when to reveal it, where to place it, whom to trust with it. You are no longer driven by impulse, but guided by intention. You begin to see that desire itself is a tool, one that when controlled turns you into a man who acts rather than reacts. You stop desiring people who drain you because their energy no longer satisfies you. You stop desiring validation because your internal world is finally louder than the noise around you. You stop desiring outcomes because you trust your capability to create new ones. And here is where your power takes on a colder, sharper form. People begin to sense that you are no longer fueled by their attention. You are no longer moved by their absence. You are no longer controlled by what you once chased. This creates a psychological imbalance that pulls them toward you. They start wanting your validation because you no longer need theirs. They start studying your attention because it is no longer freely given. They start craving your presence because it is no longer guaranteed. In this dynamic, desire flips. You become the prize, the gravitational center of the interaction. The man whose value is not diminished by desire but amplified by how selectively he expresses it. This mastery transforms how you view relationships, ambition, success, and yourself. You stop forcing connections because forced connections are built on insecurity. You stop chasing relationships because genuine connections do not require pursuit, they require resonance. You stop trying to prove your worth because proving is something men do when they secretly doubt themselves. When your desire is mastered, your actions become strategic, not emotional. You give less but with more meaning. You invest slow but with more precision. You withdraw sooner but with more clarity. You know. Longer confuse intensity with compatibility, attraction with alignment, opportunity with destiny. You begin to see the truth beneath every interaction. Who respects you, who uses you, who values you, who fears losing you, who benefits from your presence, who drains your energy, who grows in your silence, who collapses when you detach. Desire becomes a magnifying glass, not a leash. And when you govern it, you step into a Machiavellian state of power, influence without exertion, connection without dependence, dominance without aggression, confidence without performance. You become a man of controlled fire, burning but not consuming yourself, powerful but not reckless, passionate but not enslaved. The world feels this shift long before they understand it. Your silence becomes heavier, your eye contact becomes sharper, your absence becomes louder, your presence becomes more intimidating. Everything about you begins to communicate a truth you no longer need to say out loud. You want nothing you cannot walk away from. And that makes you dangerous. A man who masters his desire is no longer manipulated by affection, distracted by temptation, derailed by emotion, or destabilized by unpredictability. He becomes the kind of man whose path others try to align with. Not because he chases, but because he leads himself with such conviction that following him feels like the only logical option. This is the calculated heart. Not cold, but controlled, not numb, but disciplined, not empty, but sovereign. If this resonates with the man you are becoming, comment this phrase: "My desire obeys me." Etch it into your identity as you rise into a man whose self-mastery cannot be challenged, shaken, or undone. Number 9, the unbending frame becoming the standard others must rise to. There comes a pivotal moment in a man's transformation when he realizes that true power is not about domination, persuasion, or control. It is about becoming a living standard, a force of identity so solid that the world must either rise to meet it or fall away in defeat. This is the unbending frame, the state where your values become immovable, your presence becomes directional, and your boundaries become the architecture of every interaction around you. Most men crumble because their frame bends under pressure. They want to be liked, so they soften. They want connection, so they compromise. They fear loss, so they tolerate disrespect. But the man who has stopped chasing, the man who has mastered himself through silence, indifference, and disciplined desire, eventually evolves into the one thing very few people can influence: a man with a frame that does not bend. This is deeply Machiavellian in nature, because once your frame becomes unshakable, your environment shifts automatically. A ruler does not chase loyalty, his authority creates it. A leader does not chase validation, his certainty commands it. And a man with a strong frame does not need to prove anything. He becomes the gravitational pull that shapes behavior around him. Dark psychology explains that the human mind subconsciously seeks leadership, stability, and direction. People feel safe around a man who knows who he is, what he wants, what he tolerates, and what he refuses. They trust the man who doesn't fold under pressure, who doesn't collapse when challenged, who doesn't dissolve into emotion when confronted with conflict. Your frame becomes a psychological anchor, and others unconsciously adjust themselves to stay in your proximity. The weak will resent it, the insecure will test it, the entitled will push against it, but the aligned, the ones who respect your presence and value your depth, will rise to meet it. This is the true power of an unbending frame. It filters your world without effort. You no longer waste energy decoding intentions, begging for clarity, or chasing loyalty. Your standards do the work for you. Your silence does the work for you. Your consistency does the work for you. You become difficult to manipulate, because manipulation requires bending, and you do not bend. You become difficult to disrespect, because disrespect requires access, and you no longer grant it freely. You become difficult to replace because nothing about you feels common, reactive, or weak. A man with an unbending frame moves slowly but decisively, speaks little but intentionally, connects rarely but deeply. His relationships are built on mutual respect, not dependency. His goals are built on long-term strategy, not impulse. His self-worth is built on internal validation, not external applause. And people sense this. They sense that you are not a man whose identity shifts with pressure, nor a man who negotiates his values for temporary comfort. You are a man who stands, and in standing you expose who kneels and who rises. This is the moment your aura changes. Your presence becomes heavier, more commanding, more respected. Not because you intimidate others, though many will be intimidated, but because your consistency forces clarity. People know where they stand with you. They know what is allowed. They know what is not. They know that your boundaries are not flexible suggestions. They are walls carved from stone. And here is the twist. Once you hold an unbending frame, you no longer fear losing people. You fear losing yourself. You no longer chase connection. You evaluate it. You no longer cling to relationships. You curate them. You no longer seek attention. Attention seeks you because certainty is magnetic in a world full of emotional turbulence and weak identities. The truth is simple but merciless. Most people are shapeless, molded by impulse, emotion, desire, insecurity, and fear. But you have become carved, defined, structured. You are no longer moved by chaos. Chaos moves around you. You are no longer thrown off balance. Balance radiates from you. You are no longer the man trying to fit into someone else's world. You are the man others try to fit themselves around. And this makes you untouchable. Not because you are unreachable, but because you are unwavering. If this resonates with the strength you've been building piece by piece, comment this phrase. My standards shape my world. Say it as the declaration of a man who no longer bends for anyone or anything misaligned with his purpose. Number 10. The final alignment. When life bows to the man who masters himself, there is a final stage in a man's ascent that most never reach because it demands a level of inner discipline, self-respect, and psychological sovereignty that few are willing to cultivate. The stage where life itself begins to align around him. Not because he forces it, not because he chases it, but because he has refined himself into a man who is impossible to ignore and even harder to derail. This is the point where everything you have learned, withdrawal, silence, strategic absence, emotional immunity, controlled desire, and an unbending frame, merges into one unstoppable identity. You become a man who no longer reacts to the world, but directs it. A man who no longer begs for opportunities, but attracts them. A man who no longer fears loss because everything that leaves is replaced with something more aligned. Machiavelli wrote that fortune favors the bold, but what he meant was far deeper. Fortune favors the man who governs himself with such precision that chaos cannot corrupt him, weakness cannot tempt him, and noise cannot distract him. Dark psychology supports this truth. Humans gravitate towards structure, toward dominance, toward certainty, toward the man whose presence feels like direction. When you reach this final alignment, your life no longer feels like a battlefield of confusion and missteps. It becomes a chessboard and you move through it like a grandmaster, thinking 10 moves ahead. While everyone else scrambles with impulsive decisions and emotional reactions, you begin to realize that the world bends in the direction of the disciplined because the disciplined are the only ones capable of leading it. You detach from anything that lowers the frequency of your mind, your ambition, or your identity. You stop explaining your choices because a king does not justify his strategy. He simply executes it. You stop engaging in arguments because your time has become too valuable to waste proving a point to someone who lacks the depth to understand it. You stop allowing people to return after betraying your trust because your boundaries are now carved in stone, not in sand. You stop tolerating mediocrity inside yourself and around you because alignment cannot exist where standards crumble. And as you transform, the world around you responds like metal to a magnet. The people meant for you walk toward you. The opportunities aligned with your purpose appear without force. The distractions that once consumed you begin to feel irrelevant. The chaos that once intimidated you now feels small, almost trivial compared to the storm you command within. Your aura thickens, your presence strengthens, your influence becomes undeniable. You become the kind of man who leaves an imprint simply by existing, the kind of man whose silence speaks louder than another's speech, whose posture communicates more than another's arguments, whose discipline becomes a language others cannot help but respect. Life begins to align because you have removed everything that once misaligned you. Neediness, desperation, emotional volatility, weak boundaries, unfocused desire, and self-betrayal. You are no longer at war with yourself. You are at command of yourself. And in that command, life finds its order. This is the Machiavellian truth most never understand. When you master yourself, you stop asking for power because you become power. You stop hoping for alignment because you create alignment. You stop chasing life because life starts chasing you. If this chapter resonates with the man you know you are stepping into, comment this phrase one final time: I align my world. And to anyone listening on Machiavellian mode, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications because the rise doesn't end here.